What's up? It's Mike Mal, and you are listening to the Athletor Podcast, where we dive into the processes, mindsets, strategies of some of the most successful athletes and coaches from all walks of life. You're listening to the Athletor Podcast. This week's guest is the RTC coach at the University of Illinois, and it's Bryan Medlin. And he's widely regarded as one of the best minds in the sport of wrestling. We get to talk about his trips over to Ossetia, his time with Sidikoff, and really at a kind of a grassroots level, one of the things that I was most interested in is the way that he's dealing with his kid coming up through the sport and all the people around him. Don't miss this one. Bryan Medlin's next. Athletor Podcast back again. This week's guest, I said it before the cameras turned on, but it's true. One of my favorite humans on earth, one of the most cerebral coaches in and around the NCAA, Bryan Medlin. Thank you so much for coming on, brother. I appreciate it.
No, man, I'm happy to be here. Mike, I think it's been almost a decade now. I've been listening to you and, grew to be a big fan of, the stuff you did before Flow, with Flow, after Flow. It's awesome. So love to talk wrestling with you anytime.
Let's talk wrestling then. What do you say?
Can't believe I get paid for this.
I know. I think about it all the time.
Just talking wrestling.
My wife is downstairs right now, taking phone calls from providers and medical providers and troubleshooting insulin pumps. And she's like, "You gonna go talk about wrestling with your buddies?" And I'm like, It's a blessing for sure. There's no question about it. But here's a couple things that I don't know if everyone knows about you. You spend a good amount of time in Ossetia, and you and Zane have kind of made that a yearly thing. First of all, before we get into the ins and outs and how much you've learned from going over there, what's the climate like now? Can we go over there? Is it not that I know it's safe, right? But it's not that it's not safe. But the visa situation, does that become tricky or no?
It became more expensive for sure. The thing is, the place where all the wrestling happens hasn't changed. The Caucasus Mountains, you got Ossetia, Dagestan, Chechnya. They're the same as they were before the war started, as far as safety. And, first time I went over there, everybody's like, you read online, it's like, don't go there. It's, crazy and you're going to get kidnapped. And I went there. I'm like, these are the most hospitable people I've ever met, just honor driven, good people. But it's on the way there, you hear some sketchy stories about, people getting stopped in Moscow. And, we've been stopped a couple times where, they held a guy behind, the passport control for a couple hours, and it's like, not really sure what they're doing. I think they have their own kind of set of rules in Moscow, but once you kind of make it past there, and I figured out a kind of a new way to get there. So instead of going through Moscow, they can go through Georgia and just drive in to the Caucasus regions, really close to Ossetia. So I'm going to do that early next year.
Interesting. Okay, let's get into the actual wrestling. That is wrestling mecca. That area of the world is, by all accounts, wrestling mecca. What makes the sport of wrestling so important to the people of the Caucasus Mountains? Like you said, Dagestan, Chechnya, Ossetia.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, manly, very, you have your lane, I have my lane type, as far as gender goes. And, for good or for bad, they are very honor driven, very this is what a man is. And, we both know wrestling's the toughest sport, including MMA, including everything else. So to be good at wrestling means you're good at being a man. So I think they look at it as, the higher I go, the more, not just good wrestler I am, but the better man I've shown myself to be, because I've held up all the honor and all the little things that go into wrestling. So I think that got into their culture, and they never really have, they don't have other sports. They've got soccer and a few other things, but as far as like they're mainly combat sport driven, where there's one versus one, and it's not, they don't have football and basketball kind of taking kids and doing, taking some athletes and putting them in other sports. They're very like, and it's free. Their parents did it, their grandparents did it, and it's just a culture of like, yeah, you're a young boy, you're gonna wrestle. Now, whether you continue through wrestling, you see them. I was lucky enough to see kids kind of grow up from the time they were super young, and not all of them continue to wrestle till they're 30,
Sure.
but a lot of them did. A lot of them did, because you can support yourself through wrestling, making money there, and it's not a place that has jobs everywhere. So they look at it as it's a good lifestyle. There's a lot of honor in it, but B, that it's in the culture. It's everybody does it, and to be better at it is, you're in the upper echelon of people.
So you say they can make money. Now, I have a good idea of what you mean, but let's just talk about the layman. I don't know that people understand how government funding works in Russia. So explain to me how let's say Sadakov, right? Like the echelon, like the top of the food chain. But then there's guys that are fourth string, 10th string, that are still making a living.
Mm-hmm.
How is that possible if you don't pay to do it, right? So we think in our brains like, okay, how are we going to get? And by the way, I'm sorry, I'm still sweating from the sauna, so I apologize. But nice. But like, so how do they make money? Because in our brains it goes, well, a youth club, you can own a youth club and the parents pay money and that's how you make your living as a coach. It doesn't really work like that over there, right? Like I remember one of the things that you said to me, it changed a lot of the paradigm in my head, and it was a while ago. If they had to pay $1 to watch wrestling, whether it be online or whether it be in person, no one would go. And it's a different shift. It makes it different for me, and I have to look at things differently there. So how do they make money?
So yeah, the thing is, and the quote is exact quote, that they have to pay $1, but it was actually a kids club coach that told me this. I asked them, how much do kids pay to be here? They say nothing. It's state funded. So a coach gets paid. Talking to some of the local kids club coaches, they get a real minimal salary, depending upon how many kids are in their club. And the better you do, I mean, a lot of these kids start getting some money at an earlier age. There's no NIL deal, but you go over and you win a tournament, you get money from somewhere. A lot of them, it's not what you could live on in America, but you can live on that. A lot of them still live in their parents' house. They don't have a lot of bills, and they're expected to train, 2 times a day. So, and the culture is set up so they can still do that without having to have a lot of money. And then, speaking of Sadakov, like, I know him not personally, like he's not my best friend or something like that, but I have been around him for quite a few years. And, I've never seen him in an Army uniform ever, but I know he gets paid through the military to be in the military. It's pretty much, you hold such a high status over there. I think they look at it as like a recruiting tool. Like, we got Sadakov, in our Army, you should come. Like, that dude's never fired a gun. He's never marched into battle. He's never going to. That's why the whole Olympic thing was so ridiculous to me, is they're just holding him at a standard that isn't, we expect, like, yeah, if you're over here, and you don't agree with going in the military, you just say, I'm not going. If you don't agree with going to, President Biden's, press conference or something like that, you just say, I'm not going. Over there. There's different consequences for not ponying up when they ask you to pony up. And, a lot of it wasn't his choice. And, that dude's as rock solid of a human being, despite a wrestler, that I've ever met. I mean, you could talk to him for 2 minutes. And when he came to New Jersey, that's all people kept saying about him is how good of a human being it was. That's why, honestly, the whole Olympic thing was such a travesty to me, just because not only are you, holding a different standard for him, it was just, I don't want to get off topic or anything like that, but it was just,
No,
it was
I don't mind getting off
very,
topic because that was kind of the next direction I wanted to go
yeah,
anyway. So
yeah. It's like
talk
you're
to me
really
about,
hurting this really good person. You're taking, to be a legend. And one thing he told me is like, there's tons in him, there's tons of two-time, one-time, you could throw a rock in Ossetia and Dagestan and hit it a one-time Olympic champion, but to be a two-timer, to be a three-timer, I mean, that's legend. Like your kids as kids are going to hear about you, once way past you're gone, and they just pretty much, hopefully he keeps going, but the odds of him being to the three-time are pretty slim now, but before I would have said
sure.
maybe good.
Well, I know, we've talked the politics around keeping the Russian athletes out of the Olympic Games this year. And you're right. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. It really hurts my brain and my heart to see them not being able to compete. But what do you think the IOC's agenda was there to keep in keeping them out?
I don't know. I mean, to be completely honest, I have no idea. Like I don't watch Fox News. I don't watch CNN. I don't watch, if it doesn't have to do with wrestling, I don't typically watch it at all. So I'm not, my gut instinct is the IOC is on, one side and Russia is, on the other, these other countries are on the other, and, they want everybody to conform to be able to be allowed to play. But sport is the place where everybody comes together to do something outside of politics, to do something outside, because from my experience, and it's just no matter where I go, like we were just in Amman, Jordan together, and, the people there were amazing. They were amazing people. And I met Israelis, I met Palestinians, I met so many different people that I realized like most people are genuinely good, but most governments aren't. So the bigger the government gets, the bigger, more power, the more they try to influence this or that or the other. I don't know what they accomplished as far as like other sports, but for our sport, when you take out the perennial favorite, you weaken our sport. And we, wrestling needs to stay around for a lot of reasons. But, I think the great thing has always been about the Olympics is it's a pinnacle. Every good guy that can be there is there, and you see who wins, and it's 4 years, and then there's a reset. And I just feel like this year there's no reset. Like we're still like talking about the Russian team they're going to send. It sounds like they're sending all their best guys to this next Worlds. But the thing that kind of makes me a little bit hesitant is like what happens in 2028 when the USOC says no, you can't come, or the IOC says no, you can't come and this happens again and again and again, and you have all these youths that we just talked about. I mean, their wrestling rooms are packed from morning to night. We were in Dagestan, and I don't know how many practices they ran, but they had 100 kids plus in each practice. Like, what happens to those kids? Do they keep wrestling if it's only world championships and only UWW events, and then they're pulled out of the Olympics? I don't know. I mean, obviously, the Olympics has been, from 80 to 84, they didn't come, we didn't go type things. We've always had these blips, but this seems more like they put their foot down. They're not getting in one way or the other. And it's kind of scary to me for the health of the sport, what it looks like if they don't, allow these great wrestlers in.
Now, without getting into the money that's involved with the IOC, because it's pretty substantial. Yeah. The amount of money that the IOC gives us is a substantial amount. Do we need the Olympics?
No. And we held a conversation about this. We need a pinnacle. We're going to need a funding, of some sort. And I don't know what this looks like, but I think if we can't have a pinnacle, then we don't need the Olympics. And we're, and I may get blackballed for what I'm going to say. And the fact is, like, it may upset a little bit of our, day-to-day operations with like USA Wrestling, or, I'm not really sure what that looks like, because I know they're funded through a different committee, and I don't know what that looks like as far as our progress. But if we can't have a pinnacle in wrestling, it's going to filter down and not end well. Now, what the pinnacle looks like doesn't have to be the Olympics. It can
Doesn't matter. We can call it whatever we want.
Yeah, grappling does a great job, I feel like, of kind of showing they don't. From what I understand, just talking to jiu-jitsu players, they don't want the Olympics or care about it because they already have a pinnacle that's big enough. It's like they're going to put flag football in to the Olympics. Those guys would trade that gold medal for a Super Bowl ring any day. The guys that are in it, they're playing, our superstars that go to basketball, they don't care if they win they care. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that doesn't mean.
But they give it up for an NBA title any day.
1,000,000%. 1,000,000%, because that's their pinnacle. We just have to have a pinnacle, whatever it is, where everybody's in the bracket. You can't kick Sadakov out. You can't kick Ugoyev out. You can't kick Sajalayev out and then have a tournament and call that the pinnacle, because, and you feel bad for the guys that won it, were in it, because none of those guys, not one of them, would have kept those guys out. They all would have wanted them there because they want to win the pinnacle. It'd be like taking the Patriots out a decade ago. Like, and you say, okay, we're going to have the Super Bowl, but Patriots, you can't come. That's not the same feeling, and maybe Ugoyev loses to Higuchi. Maybe Sadakov loses to Jamalov. Maybe Sajalayev, who looked body-wise the best I've seen him since 2016. Maybe he loses to Tajadunov, but you can't say he can't win, that they couldn't have won. And that leaves these, like, just in the wrestling geek mind, it leaves these like questions, unanswered questions. Like, they could wrestle in a month and it doesn't matter. Like, I don't care if Higuchi, Jamalov gives Sadakov a wrestle off, and we'll say it's not for the gold medal. It's just a match. Who knows what in that tournament would have been? And that 74 kilo bracket was going to be all-time best bracket. I've never seen anything like it. And you took out the perennial favorite in the bracket, not the guy who was going to win. I can't say he was going to win, but
no, of course not.
The fact is, you took out the favorite, and it cheated the wrestling nerds. So
yeah, it did.
I'm not so sure that IOC cares about wrestling nerds, though.
No, not as much as one would think, or not at all, actually. But excuse me. But how do we go? So now let's talk about the money aspect of it, okay? Because the funding, a lot of the funding does come from the IOC. Like, there's a good chunk, and not directly from the IOC for each federation, but certainly from the USOC and the Russian Olympic Committee. A lot of that, could we survive without that at the highest
level? 100%. Every time anybody says, like, oh, if this doesn't happen, wrestling won't survive. If everybody's in like panic mode as far as like what the NCAA is going to do as far as NILs and its health and everything else. But the reason why I think wrestling will never go away is because I was at a JV tournament a couple years ago, and I watched a mom whose son was wrestling in the semifinal wrestlebacks. He lost his first round, had a bye, and was in the semifinal wrestlebacks. And that mom was about to have a heart attack. It was the Olympic finals to her and her kids and her family and everybody else. It's such when you wrestle, it's such a personal sport to everybody involved that I feel like it's always going to have a place. I mean, they're talking about adding women's Greco to Fargo. They're talking about, that's not in the Olympics, but it's going to be a thing in the next couple of years that they're probably going to add it. And why? And I think it's great. The more wrestling there is, the better. I like wrestling. So the more there is, the better I think it is. So, and the fact that there isn't in the Olympics and there is nothing past Fargo to wrestle, because I don't see I don't really see women's wrestling Greco happening for at least a little bit. I mean, it's going to take a long time to get the skill level in the rest of the countries to match this. A lot of the, and it's going to be a thing. So I think it can survive without. And I think you know, the value wrestling brings to society and the value it brings to a young man or young woman when they're competing is undeniable. And it's been around for 10,000 years for a reason. And things that aren't valuable go away. It's not lucrative. That's what kind of scares me about the current college situation is, the balloon is blowing. It's never going to make the money that we want it to make, that we know that these athletes deserve, because I'm not really sure, there's enough people to, there's not 100,000 people showing up on Sunday to watch a wrestling match. There's 100,000 people that show up in the state of Illinois to watch the Bears and tailgate. I'm not sure if it's ever going to be as lucrative as that, but I don't think it ever goes away because of the value it brings.
That's fair. Can we get back to Sadakov for a minute? You told me a story about when he was in Jersey at Rutgers, and he said something to the effect of someone asked him in his match against Burroughs what he was thinking and how, and if you could set the stage, down by one with, I guess it was like 7 or 8 seconds left, something like that, and they go out of bounds. He's losing on a step. 3?
3 seconds.
Was it 3?
I think it was 3. It was less than. I think it was less than 7. But you could be right. Now that I said 3, I remember the push-out came at the buzzer. When he lifted Burroughs and he put him out, it was at the buzzer. So I think it probably takes him 5 seconds to get to the edge from there. But yeah, something like that.
But tell me about what his mind. First of all, set the stage of like what the coaches are doing, what the crowd's doing, and then what his mindset was.
So the match, I did a study on this match kind of within the year of it happening. And I know, like, everybody knows he's going to club left hand. A lot of his slide by stuff comes from that left hand. He's got a right side throw by underhook he does, or left side throw by underhook he does. This kind of does the both. But his main shot is like he's going to club and he's going to go head outside, kind of slides in with both legs and then finishes head outside. And I remember in that match, the stat was he touched Burroughs' head with his left hand 54 times before he ever shot once. It was literally left hand collar tie, left hand collar tie, left hand collar tie, left hand collar tie. So the match was happening. I can't remember the score. I remember he scored, which put him ahead by a point, and then Burroughs immediately scored, and that put him ahead by a point. So there was like 8 seconds left, and you could see the Russian coaches like put their hands on their head and almost drop down, and you see Mark Manning going absolutely crazy because there's only like 7 seconds left. But Sadakov's face, he's on, I remember he's on his left foot. He's sitting back on his left foot, and he kind of looks down, pulls his sock out, and there's no panic. There's no like, I don't know what I'm going to do. He's like, I have set this move up 54 times. And for 6 straight minutes, I've touched him the same way. So I'm going to get in. And you watch the restart, they went in, blew the whistle. He reached his left hand, boom, he's in again. And he pushes him out, and it was glorious. There was absolutely no panic in, the mindset it takes is he never thought he was going to lose. Didn't matter. Like he said, like, no matter what the score was, no matter how much time, if he was within a takedown at the end of that match, he was going to win. And, I think just playing chess, like he was literally playing chess. I feel like he played chess against Dake when he wrestled him. There's been times where he's been over competitive in matches where it kind of cost him early in his career. But when he got down and he kind of disciplined himself, that's when he had this explosion. He used to lose to Zabalov. He used to lose to a lot of guys. And when he kind of pinpointed his style and he was like, I'm only going to do this, he has fantastic defense. And this defense doesn't get talked a lot about. But, I mean, that's the other part about it is he is absolutely great defense. His pace is amazing. His cardio, he knows. He's legendary in Ossetia. Like I remember we ran up these mountains. So I took Zane and a couple guys, and we ran up this mountain with one of the coaches. And I mean, this mountain is 3 miles to the top, and there's kind of meandering hill that goes up there. And we get back down, and the coach told me, he said, with a straight face, he said, Sadakov does that twice in 30 minutes. I said, there's no way. There's no chance. Like, it's physically, unless he's flying to the top in an airplane and then flying back and then flying to, like, it just, but he's mythical. Like, that's the thing, is for those kids, those guys like Sadakov, Fedzayev, you know, they're missed. They're beyond, like, I don't think he could. I think he's really fast, and I think he can run really fast. Do I think he can run it in 30 minutes? No chance. So, I mean, it's one of those things, like, he's a hero. He's still a hero. And not going there didn't make him less of a hero to those guys. It's just to him personally. Like, you're hearing, you know, they're saying, like, some of those guys are having a hard time sleeping at night and things like that. It just makes me feel ugly in a sport where I never feel ugly. Like, I always feel great about wrestling. It's just when politics and corruption seep into a sport that is built on honesty, like, it rubs me the wrong way. It's why I love wrestling so much, is it's so rare that it does. So when it comes in, it's such a black eye.
Yeah, it is ugly. You're such a nerd, and I say that lovingly. Trust me, I do.
I'm fine with it, man. As I said,
no, but I say it lovingly because
yeah, you are.
I am too.
You are also a nerd.
Yeah, but here, one of the things that I love about the way that you approach the sport is it is data driven as much as it can be, right? Like, we don't have the statistics that baseball has at times. But you and I have also spoken about things like weight classes and how there's really no systematic or statistical approach that goes along with choosing weight classes. Like, I remember when they reclassified the weight classes, and one of the things was, well, 74 is just a perennial weight class. Like, it's, you know, it's Saitiev, it's Jordan Burroughs. It's like, why are we doing that? That doesn't make any sense to me. Like, look, if the evidence shows us that 163 pounds or 74 kilos is the most, you know, there's a huge spike in the amount of human beings that weigh that much. All right, that's fine. But don't just tell me that it's a perennial weight class. So if you had to do it over, if you were the king of wrestling and you could make the rules and the weight classes, where do you think you would go with that?
Obviously there would be more. I mean,
well, right.
More is better. Six is really low. You know, I'm not sure you could cover everybody and make everybody happy with 6 weight classes. I mean, that goes back to we're scrapping, we're clawing for scraps of what they give us, you know. So 6 weight classes, I'm not really sure. I know Dave Kirby. So Dave Kirby was the head of FILA's scientific department, and they did a study with all of the male natural weights of Greco and freestyle wrestlers. And they based those weight classes on, like, statistical evidence that the walking around weight of most freestyle wrestlers is this, whereas the most and it makes a little bit of sense when you just watch freestyle and Greco, but you watch at the U17. Go back and watch the Olympics and freestyle and Greco and notice their body type differences. You know, usually a Greco wrestler is a little bit thicker necked, a little bit thicker shouldered. You know, their average weight is a little bit bigger. So their starting weight is 60, freestyle is 57. Now, 57 this year was a little bit of an anomaly because the best wrestlers, you know, and it wasn't always like that. Like, I feel like 2021, you know, people were making it, but it was difficult. Like, Rei Higuchi missed weight that year, but it was difficult. And 2016's bracket, what 57 was my second favorite bracket of all time. I mean, that bracket was absolutely loaded with just superstars, and they all made it just fine. But I think this year's Olympics was very bad. Like, you saw a Bakarov, you saw a Haratunian, you saw the weight cut get to them in ways that, to be honest, like, if it's 61, it wouldn't have gotten to him. And those guys are great. And I would even say Higuchi. Higuchi did a good job of systematically shrinking his body over the years. And that's one thing I've noticed about that 57. And it's one thing me and Zane talked about early in his career is, like, I don't see a lot of success for guys that go 61 and then try to pull down late for 57. If you're going to go 57 and 57 is the Olympic weight, you have to start there, because you have to shrink your body. Like, it can't be a weight cut thing. It's got to be, I'm going to take some muscle mass. I'm going to take some of my just mass body weight, and I need to bring it down so that weight is more manageable. So 57, 74, I mean, you got to have a middle weight. And like you said, 74,
No, I get it.
Seems like
I was picking on 74 just because
Yeah.
of the lore around it. But if it's the right weight, it's the right weight.
Yeah. No, I mean, I just would love to see a weight class between 65 and 57. I mean, if we could just have one more in there, and if that means we take 86 up to 90 and pull that 97 and go 90 to 110, I'd be fine with that. But there
Sure.
needs to be a weight between 57 to 65, because you saw guys that were 65, like Haji Aliyev. If they're 61, he's down at 61. There's guys that
Absolutely.
were at 65 that I wouldn't say are small, but it's not their perfect weight class. It's not his,
Right.
That's not his perfect weight class. So, I mean, he would rock the world at 61 kilos and then, go up to 65 for Olympics and be not the best version of himself. So, I mean, I just would like to see a weight class between there, but I would like to see 10 weight classes if we can.
Okay. You talked about Haji. You talked about 2016. That 57 bracket was what? Kinkashvili, right?
Kingashvili won it. And like
Yeah.
Higuchi, but I mean, to be honest, like, it was a little bit of, I mean, there was like a weird shot clock at the end that was unexpected. Then they let Kingashvili kind of hold his wrist, like double hand hold his wrist for like a minute. So it was like a weird final, but the semifinals were unreal. Just, you had Rahimi, Bone, Rodriguez, like you had all these just guys that were monsters that had just, and 65 was good, and 74 had some horses, 86 had a couple horses. You know what I mean? It kind of got further out, but I feel like 57 was the weight. 65 was really good too, but I would say 57 is my probably of the modern era of wrestling, since the internet has been able to let us watch all these matches. 57 Rio, and then what would have been and still could be, to be honest, like, that was a phenomenal weight, 74 in Paris.
Yeah, that's a great weight class. All right, let's shift gears here a little bit, because you do have a young man, your son, that's coming up through the sport right now. How do you take what you've learned from the highest level of the sport and go, probably, I'm going to assume, against the grain in training with your son at a youth level? Like, how do you implement what you've learned from around the world to now and take it and help your son with it?
I guess the number one thing I sat down and thought about is, like, if you look at all of the wrestlers in the Olympics that were there, just not champions, just all the people that made the Olympics, they all have one very common trait, is that they love wrestling. So getting him to fall in love with the sport, whether it was giving him heroes or, making wrestling such, like, to me and our family, is just, it's such a big deal to be a wrestler, not be a good wrestler, to be involved with wrestling. I heard this, if you've ever heard it, there's a great documentary on Al Jazeera called Iran's Sporting Dreamers. Have you ever seen this?
No.
So watch it. You'll love it. By the way, it follows
Okay.
their cadet team into the World Championships. One of the first years the cadets were back, I think 2011-ish. But it follows these Iranians, and their home life is what you think. There's dirt floors and there's whatever. But there was one quote in that movie that just it stuck with me as a young coach. And I've spouted this to a lot of wrestlers, is that this guy said, "I love wrestling the way other kids my age love women. Like, I love it. I have passion for it. Like, I take care of it." You know what I mean? Like, you think about the way you are with your first girlfriend, you're giddy around her, you want to do, you feel awkward holding their hand in public, like, think about like wrestling as a just sheer passion. And that's one thing I tried to give him. And, I've been lucky to be around great human being wrestlers. And I was able to say, okay, hang around Zane Richards, go to Zane, go to Russia with us for a month and hang around Zane Richards, and not just listen to what he says outside of the, on the wrestling mat, but look at the way he carries his body. Like Sadakov would grab him and practice with him. And it was just, he was so humbled by it, and, hanging out with Isaiah and going to Final X's and things like that. And he saw the value of wrestling past money. And, I think that was, the one big hurdle. And the second biggest hurdle, I think, for me as a parent, and I fell into this on one occasion, I quickly recognized it and I pulled back from it, is that you don't need to compete for validation. And that's the thing, is like you have a kid, he's, you kind of want to see where he's at, you send him to a tournament, and it's like, we're just at this tournament because I want feedback for, what we've been doing, and personally, like as a dad, you know what I mean? Like that's, and I recognize that right away. And that's one thing I've tried to do. And for what it's worth, like, I don't think my son would have, he's not like a go to Tulsa. And, when he was young, like, he just wanted to have fun, man. He just wanted to hang out with his buddies and laugh and be a kid. And like, I think forcing him into that would have made him resent it. He would have drug his heels in. And at this point in his life, as a junior in high school, I don't think he would love wrestling the way he loves it. And we were able just to, instead of going to a wrestling tournament, we'd go to a camp, in Oklahoma, and during COVID, in I don't know, an office building of some sort with a couple mats and a bunch of killers, and we would eat barbecue and laugh. And the wrestling was tough, but it was like everybody, it wasn't about like, hey, if you lose here, if you get taken down, you feel shame, and I think that's a lot of parents, a lot of very rational human beings I know fall into that trap, instead of just getting their kid as far along as the sport as they can, but having them fall in love with it instead of validating their time. I can't stand that when parents say that, like, we've put so much into this. We who are you? Like, I didn't see you wrestling, I saw your son out there wrestling. So, and I mean, I get that it's family sacrifice and everything, but if it's not for the kid, it's not really in the right sport, right frame of mind, in my opinion. So it's for the
I
wrong
agree
reasons.
with you. There's I'm sure I've told it on this podcast before, but it warrants telling again. I had a kid, and this kid was very good. He did wind up getting a scholarship to a Division I school, and he was a very good wrestler. I remember his dad scheduled a private at 9 p.m. on a, let's call it Wednesday night, or no, Tuesday night, because they wrestled on Wednesday and they wrestle on Saturday. And his dad walks in the room, and it's February in Jersey, and he walks in the room and immediately turns up the heat. And I'm like, okay, what are you doing, bud? First of all, nobody touches the thermostat in my house, let alone my club. So there's that. And then he immediately walks in. Now, keep in mind that this kid went to school all day, practiced with his high school, drove almost 90 minutes to get to the club, doing his homework on the way to the club. And then at 9 p.m., his dad says to me, we have to get about 5 pounds off. And I look at him, I'm like, you better strap up then, dude. He's like, what?
You need more than
He's
5.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm like, something tells me you better get on a jog right now. He's like, oh no, he does. I'm like, as long as we're clear about that,
Yeah.
he has to get 5-6 pounds off. You know, and it's that type of, how do you help parents along? Because I know you're a genuinely good person that will not be overly confrontational in those situations. How do we help these parents who probably do have good intentions? They do. I mean, let's
They
be
absolutely
honest.
do.
I don't. They. It's not like they're trying to hurt their kid. They're trying to see their kid have success. And so, how do we talk to them and explain to them, like, no, this is not about you at all. Like, not even a little bit about you. How do we
Yeah.
talk to them?
Well, I think, you know, one idea I had a couple years ago, and it, you know, I kept trying to push it in places, and it didn't really have the right time. I think, you know, that early fall would be a perfect time, is to have a wrestling camp where you have wrestlers wrestling in one area, and then like a Saturday, Sunday, to where you have breakout sessions with parents. And I've done this at camps, and it's been awesome, where I pick a couple parents who I think get it, that absolutely get it. And I can't, one of them's a recruitable athlete, but I did this at my camp where I had Matt Webster, who's Cannon Webster, grew up with him. You know, I think Matt gets it. Like, I think he understands a lot of, you know, how to be a good wrestling parent. And parents were asking, I was like, okay, the kids are practicing, you know, you guys ask them, and then they'll kind of feed off. And I was like, okay, we'll go for like 20 minutes. And it was like an hour and a half. And they were still asking questions. Well, what do you say when your kid wants to quit football? You know, what do you say when your kid's coach is telling them to go down a weight or whatever? I think there needs to be education. We're so focused on educating wrestlers and getting them better in single A's and getting better, but one of the biggest factors of them being successful is their home life. You know, and I heard some guy say this. It was a guy from California. I can't even remember his name, but I loved his relationship with his son. And I was asking him, like, how often do you guys talk? Like, what's your procedure after a match? You know, he's like, we go up, we hug each other, then we can't talk. Like, we made it a rule, we can't talk for like 10 minutes. I thought that's genius. He said another rule is, if we sit down to eat, if we're eating anything, you can't talk wrestling. I think that's another rule. Like, these are little ideas that I have sought out because I actually have stake in the game, and I wanted to like educate parents. And then when I became a father, I wanted to institute these policies. But these are policies that, like you said, this very rational person, every single parent loves their kid. I don't think for a second that kid that showed up at your club, his parent doesn't love his son any less than you love your son. He just is doing what he thinks is right. What comes out naturally is like, you know, saying the word we. You know, I think that that's a red flag. The second you said we are doing this, you now instituted yourself in that wrestling match. That's your son's wrestling match or your daughter's wrestling match. That's not yours. Now, you can be a big part of that success, just like as a coach, I can be a big part of a kid's success. But the success is ultimately, and the failure is ultimately on him. So I think, you know, personally, I think educational courses, you know, I don't think you put it online and people will listen to it. But I think I love the idea of having a dual wrestling camp. And I know like Jeff Jordan does some stuff like father-son camps that became more of like bonding stuff. And I've had a couple parents that go out to those and they said they're really awesome. But, you know, for the most part, like, I think that that's one of the solutions. But I have a funny story about this. So I came up with this idea and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this with my high school team. So I had one parent who I was pretty much planning the entire speech about. And I'm sitting there, I'm talking, and he's getting it, man. Everything I was saying, he's like shaking his head. I'm like, yes, yes. And he comes up to me afterwards and he goes, man, that was awesome. I'm like, oh, got him, you know? And he's like, yeah, so-and-so really needed to hear that. And I'm like, no, so you weren't knowing I was talking about you the whole time, you know? So, I mean, it's one of those things like parents don't see it unless you tell them, and, you know, they've got to see it. Like if they see a kid that's got a great relationship with their parents, is a good kid, you know, if you do all the world team members, if you did, you know, from the whole Olympic team, I'm going to guess every single one of them had great relationships with their parents. Like, and I'm just going to guess it because I feel like I've seen them hugging, talking, interacting with each other outside of wrestling. And that's a big part about it, man. Those kids got to know you support them outside this sport, and your love for them isn't indicative on, is there going to be hard times? Yeah, 100%. Like you're going to get mad at your kid. I got mad at my son when my one thing is full effort. If you're giving your best, I'm fine. But if I felt like you weren't, that's when we had to have those tough conversations. And he still talks about them, and they're not negative. They're just things that have to happen as a wrestling dad / coach, So, but
Sure.
Education's the key, just like anything.
Go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, I'm curious how you balance no talking wrestling at the dinner table when I feel like if you're building, a culture around, just loving the sport, I feel like that's you're gonna end up circling around to that of, like Penn State and Iowa wrestles this week. Like, where are we gonna watch that? And how does that kind of look for you guys in your household?
Yeah, I mean, for one, that's what he said. They don't talk wrestling. We talk wrestling, but it's not about my son's wrestling. Like I don't bring up a match, and be like, man, your feet were a little bit slow. I bet those hamburgers are going to help you out, or something like that.
Hey,
like I never.
I got to stop it right there. Medlin. Hold on.
Hamburgers don't make your feet slow.
No, no, my son will literally grab my wife and like start drilling. I'm like, hey, now is not the time. Now is not the time.
Yeah, no, for sure. And when they're excited about it and they love wrestling, it's hard to steer the conversation away. But you also have to have balance in your life. Like you can't, it's good to be solistically dedicated to our sport. But if you have absolutely no balance, when this sport ends, you're toast. Like, what social skills are you going to be? If you can't not talk about wrestling, like when you're sitting down with your boss at a dinner 10 years from now, when wrestling doesn't matter, how are you going to communicate? How are you guys going to like verbalize things that are outside? I'm not saying you have to have passion for things outside of wrestling, but you have to be able to joke and hold a conversation. And, wrestling is a big part of our life right now, but I'm going to guess in 10 years, 15 years, when he's done wrestling, if he wrestles that long, like when he brings his kids over we're not going to sit and talk about wrestling. We're going to talk about hunting and fishing and, the world and life and God and, things like that. I hope. So started early, I guess.
Yesterday, what's today? Thursday? No, I'm sorry, Monday. So Labor Day. My son just got a hair up his ass. He's like, Dad, we're going fishing. I'm like, we're going fishing. Let's go. We're going fishing. And we went fishing. And I don't think we talked wrestling at all. We were talking about goofy stuff coming out on Netflix and stuff like that. And it was one of the most enjoyable times I've had with my son, not on a wrestling mat in years, dude. And we didn't catch a damn fish. He was like, damn, we didn't catch anything. I'm like, no, we won today, bud. We won today.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Good for you guys. I think that sparks, and it doesn't want to drive. I'm not saying this to drive kids into things that aren't wrestling, because they don't need them, but they also need that father-son time that is not connected to this sport. So you validate your love for him and not for the love of him as a wrestler.
Yeah, it does get really tricky because, like you said, it's such a personal sport. It's such a personal sport. There are times when I look at him wrestle and I look at my wife and I'm like, those ain't my feet. Those ain't my feet. There's no chance. There's no chance. And, but again, and I have to fight. I have to fight the urge to say those things out loud to anyone other than Medlin and the rest of the internet.
And the rest of the world.
Whatever. But he gets it. I goof with him about it. All right, we are running low on time here. You got anything else before we get moving on these quick questions, Joel?
You talked about, with your son and kind of developing his love for the sport, and more so the love for the sport as opposed to like loving to compete or loving to win. How do you kind of build that mindset of, loving the sport without necessarily needing to have competition as the carrot to dangle in front of you?
So one thing, and this started when he was pretty young, is, I was very, like, there's so much honor in working hard at things in our household. Like I come from a very blue collar family full of farmers and factory workers and people like that. And just telling him, like, being the hardest worker in whatever you're doing is the most important. So celebrating hard work in a way that's like, hey, I'm taking you out tonight because you busted your butt. Like, we're doing this, and we're making it special because you absolutely worked as hard as you could. And I would be proud of him, tell him I love him, whatever I can make out of a hero. And then we would talk about, like, my dad, and we would talk about, the fact that he wasn't a wrestler, he wasn't a football player, he wasn't anybody, because he worked 2 jobs in high school, and he worked triple shifts at a foundry. And like that for me is like a little bit of what built me into a person that could, get into any situation and feel like I can at least compete with everybody because I can work really, really hard. So I knew that work ethic and everything else was going to be a big deal. The love for wrestling, I think, I would love to take credit for it, but the fact is I didn't make it hard for him to love it. And then I had great heroes for him, great people to point to, like Cal Snyder. And he got to meet Cal Snyder at a young age and be like, hey, if you make your life like this guy, this is a great life, and it's obtainable. Like that's an obtainable thing. Like going in, I don't, like I said, I don't watch football, but telling him, hey, you could be like this all-star running back, that's not obtainable for my son. Like, he's 140 pounds. Like, that's not an attainable goal. And sometimes, and I feel like wrestling parents do this too, is like a goal has to be obtainable to be motivating. You can't have a goal that's so far ahead of the kid's ability and it be motivating. It actually does the opposite, like demotivates a person, So I think having a goal of, hey, these were his steps through high school. Like, this is what Zane did. Zane wasn't a superstar, but he worked really hard, kept his mouth shut. He asked questions when he was supposed to, put his nose down. He lifted his head when he should. And this is what he came away with. So I think he recognized the possibilities of being good in a sport that he genuinely was falling in love with as he was doing it, because we tried to make it it's not going to be fun. It's not going to be like playing at Xbox. Xbox is always going to be more fun, but it's going to be rewarding at the end of it. At the end of the day, after a 2-hour practice, everybody typically smiles because they know they just did something very rewarding. So I think I tried to make it as easy as possible. And then one thing I didn't think about till his first tournament, he didn't compete till he's like 12 or 13. And even that year, I think he only had a couple tournaments, was he wasn't a good competitor. And I was like panicked. I was like, the things started happening in the match. Like, he kept giving up. He didn't know the rules of folk style at the time. He had only wrestled freestyle. So he wasn't sure how to cover the guy. He kept getting reversed. He was locking his hands. He ended up winning the match, but it was still like, oh no, maybe I made a mistake by not putting him in tournaments. But you know how quick that came? That came within 2 years. So yeah, that's the easiest skill to get, is to be a competitor. Like, the hardest skill, like, you can be a better competitor having talked to a mindset coach or, reading a book. Like, you can literally flip your competitive mind, but you're not going to make your arm stronger in that amount of time. You're not going to make your single leg better in that amount of time. You're not going to read a book and then in that 2 weeks or 1 week, whatever it is, your single leg's not going to become like Ray Higuchi's. Like, it takes years and years and years of that skill building. So I think the competitiveness, I think not getting the instant feedback is really the biggest problem. Is like, the kid wants to know, like, and really, what kind of competitor is he? Are they wanting to wrestle in local tournaments and just smash everybody because they feel good, because it makes them, feel like their work is validated? Or are they going out to competitions to get beat? Or, I don't really like that mindset either. Like, throwing a kid in over his head for just absolutely no reason, just to say, he needs to know where he stands. No, he doesn't. He doesn't need to know that. Keep him blind to it. My son thinks he's going to beat, Kyle Dake next week. I hope so. I hope he does it. He has blind trust in it. That's fine. And that's great. And I think trying to instill that, make sure that you're competing for the right reasons, I guess.
Yeah. Going back to what you were talking about, educating parents, Jared Lawrence and I have talked about putting together an online, not just a course, but like a subscription-based kind of model of like, here's how you can check in periodically. Here are the red flags. Here are the talking points that you need to speak to your kids about. Lawrence and I have already put pen to paper on how we're going to do it, and we're going to do it on this platform on Athletor. But I think there's a way. I really do. I think that there is a way that we can kind of get parents to check in with how they're bringing themselves through the sport as a parent. And that's a valuable thing. And I guess the reason, it's not just a shameless plug. I guess the reason that I wanted to bring it up was because, we're going to talk to people like you who have not just athletes in the sport, but have coached at the highest level. And I think that it's so valuable in what you're doing for the sport. And I guess it's more of a thank you than anything else.
That's awesome, man. I would say Doug Schwab is another one. I watched his interactions with his son was awesome when we were in Amman. Like when he lost, when he won, he had the right conversation in both times. I think the one problem with video is the wrong guys are going to watch it. And I'm not saying it won't cause it. I guess like finding that parent, like I was having that club parent that making him watch it. And I'm not sure if like making somebody do it, they're going to have to want to do it. So if you're curious about it, I think one thing that could help you, and we could talk off camera, like in my mind starting to roll, is like having these, current superstar wrestlers talk about their relationships with their dad. That might be like a little bit more incentive to have that kid, because everybody watches wrestling, thinks their kid's going to be Kyle Snyder. But how did Kyle Snyder's dad interact with them? That's what that guy should be trying to mimic, not like his coach or anybody else. So,
and Kyle's dad would be more than happy, and his uncle too. His uncle was big into the sport too. How they brought him up through the sport, it was amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before you jump in there, Mike, I'm going to take your shameless plug one step further. If you want to hear more from Bryan talking about how to do parenting at a high level, sign up on the link below and we will keep you posted on when that releases.
There you go. There's the shameless plug. Okay. Don't think about these questions, just fire. You ready?
Okay.
What's the best wrestling shoe of all time?
Rulons.
Yes. Okay. What's your favorite colorway?
It's the camo ones. I had a pair for like 15 years. They became like socks and you couldn't destroy them. Literally, they flew out of the back of trucks. They were left outside at times. Like they never rotted, sole in them, just eventually wore off. It was 15 years. Like I can't think of a better one.
No, they're good shoes. They're very good shoes.
Yeah.
Okay. If you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about the sport of wrestling, what would it be?
Make folk style freestyle.
Just all, like bang. But I think here's the thing. I think we can, like there's it's not easy. It would not be easy. Like magic wand would be the easiest way, right? But
if I have a magic wand, that's what I'm doing.
I know. But like, one of the things like my brain goes to on these questions is like, that's pretty attainable. Like that's pretty, like, I think they're moving in that direction anyway.
The women already have a model for it. Like you literally just copy whatever the women are currently doing.
It's a better sport, man. It's just a better sport. It's a better product of our sport. I think we would keep more kids out if it was freestyle than if it's folk style. And I think I mentioned this to you. I think a kid that's not as good, like he's really low level compared to a really good kid, and the kid wants to tech him. It's 15 points and the kid just tortures this other kid. He puts him in embarrassing moves. But in freestyle, it's over in 10 seconds. Everybody laughs and be like, yeah, he's really good. He just leg laced you. You know, like that's the things that happen in freestyle as opposed to just torching these kids. And it's harder on your joints. The matches are longer. Like, I think, you know, you think about a session at the NCAA is just being half of its time. You know, realize there's more action. You may be able to cut down on the amount of mats and just watch real wrestling. And I just think for us too, like if you made freestyle, folk style, just quickly, how quickly the US would dominate the Olympics. I think we catch Russia within like a couple quads and we are flying past them, like just unobtainable. And we're creating fans. It's just a better product. Folk style is so confusing at all times to me. Like, I don't know. When they go out of bounds, I have no idea who's getting called for stalling. Like, inside guy, another guy, outside guy, who knows? Like, who knows? So it's just a very
there is a lot of it's become far more, which is ironic because the big knock was always no one can understand the freestyle rules. Well,
yeah.
Now
freestyle's really close. Freestyle. So I guess to answer your question, if I had a magic wand, I would get rid of folk style, add it to freestyle. If I don't have a magic wand and I could just change a little bit, I would take freestyle and I would do, if it's 1-to-1 shot clots, or in Greco, if it's 1-to-1 passivities, and this is the only case this happens, the guy who got the first one is winning, not the second one. So if it's 1-to-1 and it's only penalty points of some sort, shot clots or passivities, the first guy is winning, not the second guy.
Yeah, again, these do not seem unattainable at all. Okay, last question, brother. You only get 4, and they got to be American. Who is on your Mount Rushmore of wrestling?
You know, I've been losing sleep over this question since you asked me to come on here. I'm like, I'm going back and forth, but I'm going to go with my gut. And I've got 2 Mount Rushmores. The first 4 are the guys that wrestled, and second 4 are guys that like influence wrestling. But I would go John Smith, Jordan Burroughs, Bruce Baumgartner, and Dan Gable. And it's just because of, and it's in and out, but I would say those.
Okay. And who's on the second?
I would add a second one, like a guy like Jeff Buxton, who pretty much, you know, there was no Uber club. Like, he created one of the biggest powerhouses and just the influence of wrestling. I would put more Gable towards the influence part instead of the other. Sure. And for Cale Sanderson, you know, it's untold whether the health of the sport is going to be good from the influence he's had, but like just the juggernaut, you know, the ability to get in the portal and, you know, do whatever, like that's transcended the sport in ways that, you know, I didn't really expect. And hopefully it'll be good for it. I hesitate to say that it absolutely will, but, you know, those are 3 guys kind of right off the top of my head that have influenced in ways that, you know, it changed it forever. I would say Dave Schultz is on that one too.
Why Dave?
I guess like the stories of him are the same as like Sadak. He's a myth. I never got to meet him. I was in the same room as him a couple of times. He's always just brought this just genuine, pure energy to it. You know, and just the amount of impact his life and his death had on the sport, it's enormous. You talk about these kids that went to Foxcatcher, and it's like, I don't know who I wrestled in the state finals, but I remember Dave Schultz grabbed me and did a single leg on me once, or, you know, whatever. I mean, these great Kerry Colat stories of whoever just went there, and he's just was so influential on people that we look at as, you know, guys that could be on those Mount Rushmore.
Sure. Stats. What's your favorite Dave Schultz story?
Did you tell me this? I feel like somebody just told me this, so I don't know if you told me this. But so he won the Olympics in 80, right? He won the Olympics, but the Russian wasn't there. It wasn't 80. It wasn't 80. It was he 84. Won the Olympics or won the World Championships, and then a Russian. I don't know. Somebody just told me a really awesome story, and I don't want to repeat it. But either Chael told it. So it was on your podcast. I listened to it. That was awesome, man. He wouldn't call himself a world champion or Olympic champion. Like that's the That's one of the coolest things. And the fact that when I went to Russia, everybody knew him. And the reason why, and I learned Russian because of him, because when he went over there, he took the time to learn their language, to try to assimilate himself into it. So when you go to Ossetia, you go to Dagestan, there are tons of people. Like I bought a bunch of Rudis Sly Fox stuff and I shipped it over there, and they thought it was gold because like they love him over there for the personality he was. So his impact strung past American wrestling into like the Russian culture, and that's pretty cool.
Big time. All right, Medlin, it's always great to talk to you, but it's even better if it's recorded, and I appreciate that, brother. Thank you so much for coming on, brother.
Appreciate you having me on, man. Love talking.
Wait, don't go anywhere. Before you hit that next button, if you enjoyed listening to this episode, do us a huge favor. Click that subscribe button, and if you're so inclined, leave a review and share it.
What you wanna know, man? Welcome to the show.